I've got some good friends up here of mine that I'm excited to get a little nerdy with y'all. If anybody feels like it's getting too nerdy, you just can walk out. No, I'm just kidding. Zach's like, bye. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure, and if it's not turned on, we'll get someone to turn it on. It wasn't turned on in my last room, but I'm sure there will be questions. And so if you have questions, if you haven't been in the Handy Dandy app and you want to know what's in the Handy Dandy app, you can go there. There's a little thing called Happening Now. If you hit Happening Now, it should go to the current day. And then you can scroll down, and it is 2 o'clock, and we are in the datas and the details, and we are live, and it's not turned on for, hey, can you text Nathan and ask him to turn on our Q&A for our session, because we're going to have questions. Thank you. In just a second, you'll be able to pull down and refresh in the app, and you can ask any questions of these wonderful people that are going to introduce themselves right now. We're going to start with Kevin. We'll go down, end with Melissa, and say who you are, what company you're with, a little bit about that company, like your one-liner, just so that people know like how many rooftops or what the company does, or that little thing, and what it does, and then like give me the 30-second of your history in auto. Go. Story of my life.
First, let's turn this on.
There we go.
I could sing it. My name is Kevin.
That.
Oh, he has. Yeah, we will save that.
Karaoke story for later.
For later. Don't ask. I'm Kevin. I'm the resident nerd. I been doing web design since I was 7, literally, and ran a few agencies. Spent 10 years in telecom, and worked with like hundreds of millions of records constantly and deploying solutions for 1,000+ store dealerships. And so I learned accidentally through that scale. And part of that caused me to take some of that lesson and create AutoGenius, which is a edge delivery engine, basically a way to make websites faster using some of these lessons from big companies. And how do you, better use the data that you have, because that's hopefully the angle I think I can bring to this. It's like, what does it feel like when you actually can use the data? Yeah, glad to be here.
I'm Gary Ledoux. I'm the marketing director at Modern Automotive Network down in North Carolina. We're a 17-store dealership group. I've been there about 7 years, so in the world of automotive, that's like I'm a novice. My career before that was all marketing, but it was in the world of CPG.
I'm Melissa Cartagena. I'm with AutoNation. I'm the Senior Director of Performance Media, so all digital advertising. And I've been with them for pushing 8 years now, so I guess I'm also a novice, but I have about 20 years in digital across multiple verticals like CPG, telecommunications, and many others.
All right, so let's get into it. We're going to start with a little bit of hopefully re-education, because the very last acronym in our subtitle is CDP, a acronym that in the automotive industry is as hot as DR was in 2019, right? It's a hot acronym, and everyone's throwing it around, from dealers to industry partners to consultants, and you got to have a CDP or you're gonna die, right? All of these types of things, and I think there are potentially some misnomers when it comes to what is a CDP, because until we define that, we can't actually figure out how to get the usable data that's in the details. So actually, Melissa, I want to start with you, because you gave us just this really clear list, right? I think it was you. That was like, it was
No
Gary.
pressure.
No pressure, or both of you can. But just a clear list of like 4 or 5 things that a CDP natively is, because I think it's been kind of like extended in, and we've got like multiple letters that have been added to CDP and auto instead of including E and X and all of these weird letters. But let's talk about what is at its core a CDP meant to do.
You had like, there was 3.
You had like 3 or 4 things.
I will
Yes,
add the
lean that in.
Yeah, you can add. I know. So first and foremost, it should be a central repository for all of your data. And that means your DMS, your CRM, your call tracking, your behavioral data, which is your website, any first party or zero party data you should be bringing together into your CDP, and then putting that down to one universal record. That's a requirement for it to be a CDP. Two is you should be able to have a reporting capability in that platform. Not reporting, which I think we are traditionally used to, like looking in GA or GA4, closing rates or things like that. It's more around, tell me about the data that's inside the platform. That will allow you to create audiences and then communicate to those people. The last piece is you have to be able to activate against the data. So you have it all in there. You've resolved it down to all these beautiful things. You've made audiences. How do you now push that out to talk to people?
Yep.
Then measurement.
Yeah.
Measurement.
And
Yep.
measure
That's the
that
fourth.
And
That was the fourth thing.
identity resolution.
Yeah. the
Yeah,
layer
and then
on
we
top.
talked about identity resolution earlier a little bit, but that is similar to the centralization of all the data. It's like that's an inclusive data source in
Part of it.
Yep, in part of that centralization of data. And then Kevin kind of leaned in right at the end, and he was like, "There's one more thing that it has to do in the way that it communicates."
There's so many more. No, I mean there has to be an end state to it too. Or actually, the previous session touched on this, where it was mentioned that you have to cascade this down to the team somehow. Like ideally, it impacts experience. Like if you think of a CDP as something that is going to power your marketing, like your emails, that's just a very small piece of it. You're actually wasting quite a bit of the data when it could be actually used to change experience. So for example, a bunch of dealers that I've chatted to, even when we're working with Koons, they'll invest into reporting. So they'll have all this data going into these dashboards. And that data is actually rich with like 60, 70 columns worth of information, but it's being wasted to show a graph, right? To some executives, it's probably helpful, right? But that actually could impact how the stores treat that customer or what they know about them. And so when you think of CDP, it's good to start with the end state in mind and work backwards. Like, where do you want this to end up?
I'm going to give one more thing because everybody thought this was important when we talked about it before, but a two-way communication where data goes in and out of it at the same time. It's not just a repository.
Yes.
It has to be able to get data out and not just acquire new data.
And this is, thanks for reminding
See,
me.
that was the thing you said. And
Well, I don't remember half the things I say. No, probably very a smaller percentage of that. I think there's this misnomer, I guess, on CDP where people will think, I have my DMS for this, right? Everything goes in the DMS. But the reality is the DMS cannot store all of the events or update all the events, first at the speed at which they happen, or the frequency of these events, or the type of events that now we're dealing with, right? Like all the web interactions, what's their segment, what's their how does this person match your values as a brand? That doesn't make its way into a DMS. The DMS is for like transactions, right? And so think of a CDP as an enabler for the experiences that you want to make inside the store and outside, but it needs to be two-way and it needs to have APIs. And what I mean by that is like outside people should be able to send information into it and pull all the same data out in real time as much as possible and without paying some sort of data charge to do it, because otherwise you're hamstrung.
So if that's a CDP, right? I mean, we mentioned a few things, right? It's a central repository for data for everything to come into. It's a way to report on that data and not just look at graphs, but actually get some real usage out of it, segmentation, understanding customer behavior analysis and what customers are doing, or the way that they actually engage with your brand, or whether it's online or offline engagements. The identity resolution piece being injected into that. That it has two-way communication and that you can actually measure with it. So what's the efficiency or effectiveness of what you're getting out of it? Now, let's move into what we can get out of it. And each of you are in kind of different stages of this. And Kevin said, we have to begin with the end in mind. So I actually want to kind of like, let's clarify what you mean with beginning with the end in mind when we're thinking about setting up a CDP that's rich with data and understanding what CDP you might need in order to get the end state that you're designing. Because I want to start with you on that, and then both of you are in the process of implementing or securing a CDP. So I want to hear from you on what that end in mind actually is for you. So let's clarify, like, what questions are we asking in order to understand what that end in mind state looks like?
Okay, so I think, if I think of the end state, Amazon does a really good job of this. At least, I don't know if they still do this, but they used to. Is they have a practice when they build a product or about to build a product, they write the press release first. And so what that means is, like, before they even start on it, they write, what will people say about this? How will it feel to people? What impact will it have had? And that's a required exercise at the beginning of each meeting, at least at the product level. And then they work backwards from that. Okay, how are we going to create that outcome? And so I thought I think that's a fitting way to think about this. Like, if you think of, okay, end state, I think it's, if there's interviews being done around town, of how do people feel about doing business with a dealership, they all just like rave, right? And they're all just, so proud to refer, someone to the brand. That's the feeling that we're trying to create, right? And if you work backwards from that, you have to have delighted them. So what does delight mean? Okay, well then it means remove them repeating themselves, remove them from having to do like multiple people in the store doing double entry. Moving between different rooms, if you can avoid that. Maybe they have preferences. So, well,
and I love this because it's like a lot of people would say, begin with the end in mind when you're thinking about a CDP, and it's like, I'm really excited because we're going to lower our cost per car sold. Right? It's like, that's the trajectory. It's like, I cannot wait. We can spend less money because we're going to do this. And
that kind of thing matters too.
It does matter. And that matters to principals. But, and this is heart and core to ASOTU, is like, if the end in mind is really a better customer experience, a better online experience, offline experience, sales, service experience, and they experience delight when they talk to others about it, and whatever that delight looks like for you and your brand, then you can walk backwards into all these things. And actually, what happens about cost per car sold, like, you see it because it matters, it's actually just a result, right? Right? So let's talk through, like, and you don't have to just like copy and paste that, but I want to hear, like, as you all were thinking about, because right now, talk about where you're kind of at in the process with the CDP, and what, like, as you began the journey, like in the ramp up, what you were looking toward in the future as a business outcome.
Personally, for me, I think it was more self-serving than anything, but because it can do so much more than what my thoughts were of what I wanted it to do. But I would say, like, 4 or 5 years ago, we talked about building out a CDP at AutoNation, and I just wanted to make sure that we had consistent messaging. I wanted to make sure that we had some unification across all the journeys of all the media that we deploy. That was my end state. But my end state is not the same as other people's end states in the organization, right? So here we are 5 years later, and we're now in the process of building it, and we have these use cases, and they're all different, but I'm still in this self-serving, like, I just really want consistent messaging across the board, and I want it to be meaningful. I want it to be meaningful to the consumer, and I want it to be connected to every other department that executes any kind of marketing within our organization.
Well, and just think about that. Like, those two actually pair really well, right? Because if it's consistent messaging and it's not overlapping or awkward or fighting itself because we didn't realize that was going out and this was going out and they were trying to say different things, that actually feels really good for a customer, right? It's not just feels really good for you. That you said that it's meaningful for the customer to then receive that communication, right?
Right.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about and tell like where you're at in the stage of it and what the vision is.
Yeah, so we're running a small group of stores right now out of the 17 we have on a platform, and we're learning as we go. But since June, we've done just a really deep dive exploration on kind of all the platforms that are out there and talking to integration partners and just really trying to understand exactly how big of a lift it is. And it's a huge lift because you have to make sure, number one, you can bring all of the data in and activate it. So if you're deploying your own media, then you need to be able to receive those pieces of audience and deploy against it. Or if you have an agency that you work with, then your agency has to be able to integrate and receive those audiences and deploy against it. The platform itself will do lots of things. Like we can get into some pretty serious minutia about it. When we first started, the goal was let's create a better experience for consumers with our marketing communication, everything from email to ad deployment, right? And that means, well, if Kyle just walked in and bought a car and we had been servicing ads to him for that car, well, tomorrow he shouldn't be receiving those ads anymore. I mean, is anybody doing that with their agency right now? Do you send them a list of people you sold a car to and say, make sure none of these people are in my audiences we're deploying media to? There's a lot of waste that happens every day in our advertising, and this would help us eliminate that waste. So for us, we started that way, right? But as we started to socialize the project within the organization with the ownership, with the different directors who are responsible for service or for parts, the conversation changed a little bit because it was like, oh, that's really neat idea. Can we do this with it? I don't know, let's go find out. So the more we dug into it, the more we learned we have a lot more to learn because you just don't know what you don't know when you start the project. And in my past life in CPG, we would lean on CDPs.
CPG is consumer packaged goods.
Right. So I used to work with Hanes. Hanes sold to every retailer, in the country, in Amazon, every online retailer. We would lean on all of those companies to get data out of their CDP in order to find our audience, in order to deploy our message. So that was my experience with a CDP. When I came into automotive, I'm like, why don't we have a platform that pulls all this data together? I don't get it. Everybody's doing this. And so now here we are, and it's like, okay, let's figure out how to do that. But, like my technical expertise only goes so far. So it's been a huge learning curve for me. And now for our organization. So we've gone back and recreated our list of goals that we want to achieve. And it's an organizational lens as opposed to just a marketing lens. Right. And that's a really big thing that I think people have to understand is what are you really trying to achieve? Because if you are only doing it for a marketing perspective, then maybe you don't need a full-on CDP.
Yeah, why don't you talk about that, and let's pin this as, and we maybe should have done this earlier, but like what a CDP is not. You're
same
like,
brain,
right.
Same brain. This is great.
Because I think we've mixed acronyms in our industry at this point a little bit, and so
We never do that.
We'll never do that. Like, you mean all the AI companies? No. Sorry, anybody. I apologize. Love you all. Peace and love. But let's define what a CDP is not, in particular when it comes to like marketing automation platforms and things like that are technically different elements. Yeah.
It's a different angle than I was thinking, but that's good. This is really good. I wanted to just touch on like as you figure out if a CDP makes sense for you and what you'll get out of it, it's good to make a list of what you don't want too. So for example, like Gary's point on, like it should make you more efficient. It should make you money. Like CDP minimum should increase your conversion by 50%, minimum. But you have only if you activate a whole bunch of things. It has the potential of 10xing it, but it doesn't mean you'll get there right away. It could take 10 years, 20 years to get there. But so I think first it's like, okay, this thing needs to be efficient. It has to make us better. It has to reduce the time of interaction. And then I think from a system perspective, so think of like these different perspectives. So what is it from a business standpoint? Okay, it has to have a measurable impact. And then what is it from the consumer perspective? Like, it should be consistent. Like, I get so angry, probably unnecessarily, from going to, like, I don't know if this ever happened to you, but maybe you go to a Starbucks and you're used to a certain experience, or maybe they're a bad example because now they're not as great as they were. Because of this, they've forgotten me. But if there's a place that you normally go to, and then you go there another time and it's like different. Anyone ever happened to anyone?
Oh yeah.
How does it make you feel? You're like, what the?
Angry.
Something's off.
Angry.
It could be something
I mean, all they have
simple.
to actually do is not let Apple Pay work, and then I'm
Right.
enraged.
Oh,
so,
it's just-
this.
It's just crazy. And even this hotel, I came in with a backpack, and 3 people would not let me walk through the hotel with my backpack. They said I go out to the garage to walk across, and then another person was like, "Okay, you can." I just have to inspect it, and then we'll let you walk through. Just like little interactions like that, inconsistency can make you super frustrated.
Well, they let me walk through my backpack and my suitcase.
Now I'm prepared.
So that's messed up.
But
Now he's like, I'm taking you next time.
No, but if you think about what this does to consumers, like so now it happens. So now it's frictionless, but I just walk up to them with my backpack open. I say inspect. Like, I know that they are supposed to do that. They'll forget. I'll direct it, and then they let me through, and I have no problem. I shouldn't have to do that, and most people won't, right? And so I remember what the CDP should feel like and not feel like for the customer is important. And then, then from the tech side of things, this is maybe where, like, I think your angle is, like, CDP should make tech easier. Like, if you want to use Salesforce, if you want to use, like,
Should it be an enabler?
it should be an enabler.
It should be an enabler.
You should be able to say yes to things. I had a mentor once tell me about my last software company. They said, if you when we were bringing in a CTO, don't let them paint you into a corner. Was kind of the idea. If, like, you're bringing them on to make sure that you can always say yes and that you're not stuck. And I think that's the job technically for a CDP. It's an enabler. It allows you to say yes. You want to use the cool tools, you can do it, but it is not them putting their tracker on your site and making it a one-way connection to like you feeding them with a bunch of data and then them not letting you push it anywhere, right?
Yeah, and it's not. It doesn't necessarily do all the marketing because, and the next thing that I want to talk about is, and you each have talked about this. It's like, well, I had my thoughts about going into the CDP, right? Oh, it was going to make my marketing better. And then I told everybody about what it had access to and centralized. And all of a sudden my operations people were like, hold on, can we get a load of that, right? Like, we might be able to create efficiencies out of this too. So let's just brainstorm and spit out, like, what are some of those things that have come up in conversations, especially thinking not just online, but also offline, because I think that's something that we as an industry haven't thought about. We've thought about how CDPs can make our marketing more efficient, which is only one, like, sliver of it, right? So let's brainstorm on, like, go all the way through. What are some of those things?
I have one that's really stuck out just for me personally. I mean, so if you can take whatever data you gather in your platform and make it bidirectional back to your CRM, that could be really powerful for a number of reasons, right? If a customer has opened 2 emails, looked at 10 cars, interacted with certain types of ads, all of that is captured in the platform. That should be pushed back to the CRM. So now your BDC or your salespeople can go in and look at that profile when they're working with that customer and understand exactly how engaged they are, understand exactly what they've interacted with and how interested they are. And you can take it a step further and you can score all those leads. You can bring in a system that says, hey, this guy or this woman has done all of these things. They're very low funnel. They're ready to buy. We're going to score them high. You can build that into a platform and have an automatic scoring system and push that back to your CRM.
Assuming that the CRM will accept that, right? Because that's
Correct.
one of the problems that I think a lot of people are not a lot of people, but the few that are actually starting to go down the path now are seeing that all of these companies that you work with in auto are not all connected. They're not all created equal, so they're not all going to connect easily. And you have to figure out how to get through that part of it.
Well, and that's another kind of outcome through the exploration is you may run into a couple of walls with some of your current, tech stack, and as a result have to make the decision. Okay, if these people don't want to integrate, push data back to our platform, then do we still keep them, or do we go with somebody who will?
And to add to this, I think something dawned on me yesterday. I was trying to figure out like why is this the case with auto? It's like, and I grew up with it. I grew up in Windsor, so like auto has been part of my blood for years. But then coming back into the sales side of it now, marketing side, it's been an eye opener to see how messed up it is. It's so bad. It's so bad. It's really bad.
Kevin,
It's so bad.
tell us how you really feel.
Okay, but one of the things I really appreciated is like why I love auto is that, okay, besides the people are wonderful. You're all wonderful. But the second reason is the VIN. The VIN is an identifier that is super powerful. Not every industry has something like that. Why I love telecom before is you had the phone number and you could do so much with that. The IMEI or like the phone number of someone that made identity resolution easy because if your CDP, like a lot of this comes from telecom because telecom had to track how do they serve you when you have hundreds of millions of customers. And they all know your phone number, so that's your matching. They know where your house is because they have to serve you with internet. So they had to figure this out and clean it. And then they created standards for two-way communication. Auto created ADF way before APIs were like a thing, right? But ADF is one way. But that's how all the vendors, like I looked at that and was like, this is amazing. This, like the spec is really good actually for ADF. It's really, really good. But it's one way. And so everyone kind of got drunk on this, right? Like the vendors kind of were like, oh, this is super easy. I can inject stuff into the CRM. And the CRMs are like, oh, this is great. I can just have stuff appear in and I didn't have to build anything. But now no one built the fundamental things about taking stuff out. And that's why we're in this problem, right? So yeah, like going back to the CDP thing is, you could, if you go down this road, but you still have all these like siloed things, you might not be ready for it because you're just gonna get angry. You're gonna spend so much money and do some really cool things with marketing, and then you're gonna be like, all right, we gotta cascade this down, and it's gonna get stuck, and then you're gonna hate your job because there's gonna be a huge disconnect.
You have some leverage, obviously, because of your group size, so it becomes a little less tech debt potentially. But I'm sure you've already run into these situations where you're like, no. Where are those coming up? Yeah.
It would just because we're larger doesn't mean that we don't have that same challenge. There's tons of different platforms. There's tons of applications that we use. Like we had to take stock in everything and analyze all of it, and then have a better understanding and work with our IT department to be aligned, because if you're not aligned, it's never going to work. So we had to go through all of that as well. We're not an anomaly that we're in a better place by far. We also had similar challenges still will. Like we haven't built it fully.
Yeah.
So we're still going to experience
When Gary was talking about kind of some of the operational stuff, have you, as you've kind of like, push this out in the organization and let everyone know that you're doing it, even outside of the marketing team, are there things that people have said, hey, look, that could be something that we leverage or use or report on out of the CDP?
Not yet, but that will probably come.
It'll come up. You're like, we haven't told them about it yet because it would scare them.
I don't know that everybody has a true understanding of what it is, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's something that's on us to deliver in terms of education internally, but not everybody understands what it is. So you have to have a starting point somewhere.
I think that's okay. This is important, I think, for everyone in the room, is recognizing like even the people that are the furthest ahead in exploration of real CDP in auto are still quite in discovery mode, right? And a lot of that is because of our tech debt.
Don't be in a rush.
Yeah, don't be in a rush. Yep.
Learn.
Yeah, I think maybe more. The fear is like well, everybody has to have a CDP or else you're going to die. And it's not that dramatic, but there is an extreme level of efficiency and operational growth that you can get out of leveraging your data in this way.
The opportunities are crazy. Our list of goals is pretty lengthy. Like, it's a full-on page with all sorts of detail. And it's big things like drive revenue, but under drive revenue, we're like, okay, what strategies are we going to execute to drive revenue? Okay, we're going to take all the declined RO codes and we're going to push that into the platform, and then we're going to market to those people, right? Why? And try and figure out why it is that they declined the RO. Was it a payment thing? Was it an affordability thing? Was it, hey, I'm just not ready? Was it, hey, I don't trust you? Like, let's figure all that out. I mean, if we can uptick that 1%, that's a big revenue opportunity. So there's so many things you can do with it. It can be a little bit overwhelming. It's a huge lift for an organization. And educating yourself on how it all works and integrates and the possibilities is a really integral piece of it. But socializing that in your organization to get other people to understand it and buy into it and then want to support it is equally as important. And it's hard to do that. When you have people who aren't working in that kind of thing every day, and suddenly you have to educate them on this grandiose platform that does all these things, sometimes it's hard to boil that down. So tell me the 3 things it really does. Well,
Be a good Southern Baptist preacher, okay? Next.
Yeah.
But if you're like just starting out, like a lot of groups are hearing about this, or at the very least, you just have to get right with your data first. Like, you could do all these amazing things with the CDP, but if you have missing fields in your data, you've got duplicate names in your data, you've got to get right with that first.
Stop reading my mind, okay? Because I was just about to ask about that.
Like, that's what has to happen first. If you have that layer, then you can build on top. That's where we are.
Are you trying to say having good data is important?
Do you think?
No.
Yeah, so we got a question.
like
we got a
maybe
question
this
that was
much.
basically like, "Hey, CRM and DMS data. Not only are the fields wildly different, but oftentimes it's extremely messy. Like, how do we solve for? Okay, now at least maybe we've gotten those 2 to play ball, or we've gotten a massive CSV export from them, and we've plugged it in, and it's like, how do you clean that up and get it ready to actually start to leverage?
Most of the CDPs will do that. They'll dedupe your data. They'll clean it up.
Yeah.
Most.
With a caveat. No, I think there's always a caveat. Like, a best practice is that you can't clean the data in its raw form. You can only select from it. So, for example, like, you can't really fix your DMS data because, like, to an extent, because they might not let you push back, or they're not going to add new fields. So, like, the idea that we're going to push things back to the DMS, it's like, you kind of have to, like, get that out of your brain. Because I hear there a lot.
We have no intention of pushing back to the DMS.
So if you think
just to the CRM.
So if you think of these things as raw data sets, you bring them into a CDP in their raw format. Like, don't change anything about it. That makes your integration easier. Because otherwise, you're going to have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to try and create a clean room and do all this stuff. And then now you're a data scientist. Well, that's not like, then you didn't need a CDP in the first place. So if you're going to use a CDP, let it do the majority of the work in allowing you to select what is your source of truth. But the good ones will bring your raw data in, and then you can say, okay, for this phone number field, take it from DMS. For address, the street number, take that from the address, but take the direction from the CRM, because the DMS doesn't have a street direction field. I don't know, like, you can kind of self-select what's your source of truth per field, and then usually they'll have some sort of transformation step that you can do to combine and enrich and clean it up. But yeah, if you think of, like, the CDP just naturally is going to fix it all, that's typically what they don't do. Right.
All right. So you said the good ones, right? And I think, let's see. Well, I don't want to call out anyone in here. So we've got obviously, there's a lot of what I would call automotive specific CDPs out there that especially have newly talked about themselves as coming as CDPs, and I think the majority of what this crew is talking about, and so I want to clarify, we're going to list off as many as possible that are kind of like in the vein of accomplishing the things that we've outlined as a CDP, because I think that's important for people to understand, because like right now, I can name I'm just going to do as many as possible. And if I leave anyone out or make anyone mad, you cannot take this. Got it? And like use it as blackmail against me. Okay. So you've got companies like Full Path Orbi, Four Eyes, Outsell, C4 now, Dealer X. There's some other ones as well. That's just off the top of my head that I would call automotive specific. People that are working and operating as some level of CDP. But I want to actually have these people talk through, like, I'm going to start with Melissa, like what you researched and what you went with and what you're researching now. And then maybe if there's others that weren't named that we're thinking that are outside of automotive that are actually well able to enter automotive at this point. So let's talk about that. Yeah.
We looked at some that were like out of the box, so to speak, quotes, but we looked at a company called Quero years ago, and then Telium obviously was one of them. We use them for our data layer today, and they're our tag management solution as well. And we ended up working with Epsilon because they actually help us to manage our database. So they built the database the way that, when I mentioned just getting right with the data, they did that a long time ago. So the CDP component, which they call a PCC, it's the People Cloud Customer, that will sit on top of the database and execute what we need it to at that level. But that's who we went with.
Awesome. Gary?
Yeah, so we're running a handful of stores with Orbi right now. I would say out of everything that's grown up out of automotive, they're probably the most robust as a true CDP. But we're also in conversations with Telium, Treasure Data, and even Salesforce at this point. And we've started to have conversations with RudderStack. And there's challenges with all of them. The UIs are all very, very different. Their approach is all very, very different. The good news is they model their costs all pretty much about the same way. The biggest difference out of all of the ones we're looking at is probably RudderStack, who doesn't really have a consumer-friendly, intuitive UI that allows you to go in and kind of do the things you want to do. Build an audience, run a report, so on and so forth. They're SQL-based, so they literally sit on top of the database, and if you don't know SQL commands, then you're going to be kind of dead in the water. So for us, we probably won't go in that direction. It's going to be more about what is the platform we think, and I say we meaning my team because my whole team will be running it. What's the platform we think we're going to use the most? Which one is everybody the most comfortable with?
I think that's just that's like a good question to ask of any technology, right? What's my team going to lean in on?
Yeah.
Right. And
Do we have to rely on you as an organization to do things for us, or can we execute it on our own?
Yep.
Because that makes a huge difference.
And there's so many puts and takes across all of them, which is why it's taken us so long. And the more we go down the path, the more we learn, and the more we learn, the more we have to learn. The more we learn, we have to learn.
Yeah.
So what we thought was going to be a decision by July, here we are in October, and we're moving into more meetings
But
with more
that's the smart thing to
platforms.
do, though. Like,
Yeah.
it's not, you shouldn't be just making a knee-jerk decision on a platform that's going to be so meaningful to your organization.
Right.
You need to put the research in. So you're in a good place.
Yeah.
all right, I want to get a couple of these questions out of the way, but let me ask one more thing first, because we've talked a lot about marketing and then in-store operations, but there's a lot of real-time stuff that can get done for a customer in real-time interactions, whether that be website or like in the showroom. Kevin, you've got some experience with this. What real-time data can we execute with this?
Where do I start? What are you talking about?
You've got 4.5 minutes because I got some questions.
No, there's a
Eat up all 4.5 minutes.
no. I'll put you to sleep. Put people to sleep. I think there's a lot you can do, right? And what you can do now is way different than what you could have done, say, 2-3 years ago, because one of the things that always held us back in web is because of Internet Explorer. You always had to think about Internet Explorer, and it did weird things with like HTML and like the way it rendered websites, and so you always had to not use the new stuff that makes things really efficient. Thankfully, that's been discontinued, and so now we can go into the modern web, and now it's basically 100% of the market, or 99%. There's still Opera Mini that's in there, but we don't care about them. Now, so I think now that we know that we have a good baseline, you can start doing real-time things. So for example, with Kunz.com, one of the theses behind that one was that, all the data, if you looked at here's the other thing about data, is you could look at, say, your existing data and look at the patterns and think 1% conversion rate is normal, or 0.5% conversion rate, or 2%. Whereas I know it's possible to be 15% or 20%. And like Kunz on certain campaigns is 30% on acquisition. So like, but how we got there, like that was an example of like, in order to be able to build the really fast stuff or the more personalized stuff, we had to have the right inputs. And so, you can have a whole bunch of reports, but you can always see a pattern in what's in front of you, if that makes sense. Like if you look at data long enough, there's always a pattern there. You just have to select what pattern you're looking for.
Like the Matrix?
There's always a pattern. No, so for example, like, I look at auto, it's wonderful, but...
You're really working on that. I'm proud of you.
You've
come a long way in this session.
I've come down. It's like a therapy session. Where do I start? Okay, so analytics, Google Analytics. There's a lot of events that can be tracked, right? And you can very easily get lost as to what's actually important. But then I kind of keep this in my backpack to remind myself. Remember when phones were this size? So the reason why mobile websites have a top nav bar is because that came from this, right? Around this time when it came out. Now, why was it on the top? Well, because this was designed that your thumb could reach all sides of the screen, right? You can look at it later if you want to see it. It's amazing. Like it's a good reminder. So your data could be like, oh, mobile users don't convert, or like, oh, like I wonder why people don't touch browse our site, or like you could be looking at maybe adding another tool, or let's add a little thing to go on top of stuff, but like maybe fix the design, right? And sometimes there's things that we do because the pattern was set 10 years ago, but phones are 3 times the size now-ish, 2.5 times. My thumb doesn't reach more than the bottom like third at max. And so why is nav at the top? That doesn't make actually any sense. And you'll notice that now as a pattern. So one of your inputs, besides just like, your own internal data, is to look at other apps like Expedia or Apple App Store, like the Apple Store, or even Apple Pay. You see where the major interactions have over the last year moved to the bottom of the device. It wasn't that way before, but people have realized through their own research that makes more sense. And you'll notice that Instacart moved their main call to action from the top to the bottom. Uber moved almost all of the interactions to the bottom third. Try touching anything in the top corner on Uber. You can't. It's like really hard, and they make it so you don't even have to. You can just fly through. Like that's why I buy so much on Uber Eats. It's just so easy. You don't have to move your thumb. So as we think about these experiences, right? Like, I guess going back to like personalization, you have to, the previous session was, one of the comments was meet people where they are. So if we know that 80% of people are browsing the web, like these are websites on mobile, generally, right? It might be 75%, but generally it's about 80%. And yet a lot of the leads come from desktop. That's not because people wanted to convert on desktop. It's just because your mobile site was so bad. And they wanted to, but they left, right? And so then design things for thumbs or people with fingers. So if you kind of try and think of your persona, right? First, you can actually start a lot simpler, right? And so if you think of if you're trying to think of where to like small things you can do, is, okay, what's the experience on mobile for people with fingers? Remember that line. It's like, it's useful because most of
everybody
the
here have
interactions
fingers?
on auto, I would say like maybe 90-something% of the sites are not built for fingers. Try it out, right? Try using your site with one hand. It's almost impossible.
Meaning they're meant for.
I don't know what they're meant
Mice,
for. A
maybe.
stylus, maybe, but that,
Yeah.
the Palm
That's a
Pilot.
BlackBerry. So.
A Palm
But
Pilot?
you're saying like that. This
that's a
is
disconnect.
derived out of
data
inputs,
now,
right?
Right.
Yeah.
So
Event tracking,
yeah. So
all of those things.
why did it happen this way? Well, because the data was like, oh, how many form fills were there, or like, which is an important stat, but like no one was tracking how many times did somebody like touch the bottom of the site. If that was a metric, you would actually notice it's quite a lot. It's probably 90% of your interactions are in your bottom third of your site, but that's not a metric you're tracking in your GA, right? And so I think
we can start to track that stuff.
if you start to track the right
because we can put that
things,
into a CDP because you can build fields for that.
then you
right?
can
Yeah.
personalize things and make it better. And so I mean that's where I think now what's possible with web is you can do it in real time. So like our next gen stuff is real time, where everything's like 10 milliseconds to 20 milliseconds. It's 99% smaller than Kunz.com, like the new code base, and it's about 20 times faster.
All right, I got to cut you off.
But yeah, it's like the things you can do because you've made the right decisions, right?
Yeah.
And track the right things is pretty cool.
All right, so there was a couple questions. Where does the rejected rejected RO data come from to get into your CDP? That's a very specific question. I think that was for Melissa, maybe because you mentioned it. You should grab her afterwards. And then we talked about all-star integrations, CRM, DMS data, and I think that's all the questions we got. We're out of time. There were 4 more questions in there. I apologize if I didn't get to them, but these people are at your disposal and around the conference and hanging out, and they love to talk to people about everything that's going on. Actually, I think Gary and Melissa have like 83 text message threads about this already. So I'm sure they would be willing to add you to their text message thread. But please give them a round of applause, and thank you all for coming as well.